Get started. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming along this evening. My name is Sarah McCabe and I am here today on behalf of Switch Your Thinking to talk to you about one of my favourite things to talk about, which is electric vehicles. Before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm speaking from today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. So before we get started, a little bit of background about myself. I've worked in the sustainability field for 20 years or so now. Last 10 of them have really been focused on carbon, solar, energy efficiency and EV projects. And in my current other life, I work with non-profits, helping them work out if electric vehicles might work for them based on their specific sort of use cases and needs. And as part of that, I provide advice and do business cases for them. And I guess my other relevant experience now is that between my husband and myself, we have now owned 4 electric vehicles. And one of the people that came to my workshop says, well, why have you owned 4? Did they all, catch fire or something like that? But there is a very rational explanation. I started out with owning a Nissan Leaf, which was one of the very first commercially available electric vehicles in Australia. Drove that around for years, really loved it. And then when the new vehicles started coming out and there was a rebate, I decided to sort of make the splurge and buy myself one of the new electric cars that came out, and drove that around for about a year while my husband kept the petrol car. And after about a year of doing that, we decided, no, we can do this, we can move on, and we can become an all electric vehicle family. So he bought a second-hand car and then very promptly hit a kangaroo with it and wrote it off, unfortunately, but then went ahead and bought another second-hand vehicle after that. So I feel like I've been a bit of an early adopter and I've had a bit of experience buying some of the some electric vehicles. So I'm kind of the one that all my friends ask the questions about what it's really like to actually own one. Now, I've developed this presentation with the idea of answering questions the general population might have about using an electric vehicle and working out if it's right for their particular circumstances, because the cost savings and the environmental benefits do vary a bit depending on your situation. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Also, a disclaimer, I have prepared this workshop to the best of my ability using my research and experience, but this is a really rapidly evolving field and I am also only human. So please do your own research if there's anything you're not sure about today, but hopefully I'm going to give you some good sources so that you can go away and get started on that research. So Switch Your Thinking, who are they? Switch Your Thinking is a sustainability initiative that was founded in 2002 by the City of Armidale, the City of Gosnells and the Shire of Serpentine Jarrahdale. And they all work together as the Southeast Regional Energy Group. And Switch Your Thinking's primary objective is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through lots of different energy, water, sustainable transport, sustainable building, waste initiatives. And they currently work with 14 local governments across Perth to help empower and educate the residents and businesses in those areas. And a big part of that work is putting on lots of different workshops like this one. So if you're interested in the other work that they do, have a look on their website, follow them on the socials, or even better, just sign up to their e-news, and that way you can find out about all the different events that are coming up. I think someone might be off mute at the moment. Everyone just quickly check you're on mute. All right, this particular workshop, though, is a little bit different to most Switch Your Thinking's workshops because it's part of their energy efficiency pilot program. And that was launched earlier this year, and it's funded and supported by the West Australian Government's Department of Energy and Economic Diversification. So this is a special program that's open to everyone in WA. And this project is funding lots of free workshops like this one on lots of different energy related topics. I'm doing some of the other ones on energy efficiency and solar panels, kind of being the 3 parts of the puzzle, I guess, the energy efficiency, solar and electric vehicles. But it's not just workshops, it's also funding these energy audit kits, which are available to borrow from more than 100 different libraries and community resource centres all around the state. There's lots of great equipment in that kit, but I think the most exciting thing about those kits is they have a thermal camera, which is really useful for things like checking your insulation and stuff like that. So yeah, libraries over east have had thermal cameras available to borrow for a while, but hardly any in WA. So it's really fantastic that this project is allowing this equipment to get out to more people all across the state and help them reduce their energy bills. There is another workshop specifically about the kit, and how it can be used. So just have a look on the Switch Your Thinking website if you'd like to find out more about that. And the other great thing about this project is that just by attending one of the workshops or borrowing an energy audit kit and completing a feedback form, you could win an in-person home energy audit, or if you're building a house and you've got house plans, a NATAS assessment, which is a sustainability assessment of your house plans. So terms and conditions apply. See the Switch website for more details. At the end, I'm going to put up a QR code, and I've also, I think Kerry's popped the link in the chat as well. That's where you access the feedback form. And yes, make sure we don't forget, and you'll get a chance to fill that in at the end. All right. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about the types of electric vehicles and some terminology. Are they really better for the environment? Do they catch fire? How much do they cost? Rebates and incentives that are available at the moment. We're going to talk about life cycle assessment and costing. We're going to talk about range, battery degradation, holidays, public charges, and home charging. And then finally, we hope to have a bit of time for some questions as well. So that's a lot to get through. What I'm hoping I'm going to be able to give you today is all the information you need and none that you don't. So you can make your own decision about whether an electric vehicle is going to be right for you, because it is a minefield of information and, as I'm sure you're aware, a lot of misinformation out there at the moment. I really tried to make this information as recent and as WA specific as possible, because things are changing so quickly that international or old articles can sometimes not be relevant here. And I really encourage you, when you're doing your own research, to look at the most recent information if you can. I have lots of links in the presentation to the best, most relevant and balanced articles I can find on the topics, which you can then go away and read later. You don't need to copy the links down. That will take you a long time. At the end, we're going to show you a QR code so you can scan it and get a document with all the links in it. And there's also in the chat, there is the link to that document as well, so you can get it from there. All right, and because we've got a lot to get through, I'm not going to take questions during the presentation. Feel free to put them in the chat. I'm just not great at multitasking and reading the chat and talking at the same time. But Kerry is here from Switch Your Thinking. She may be able to answer the question, and so she will in the chat, or we'll talk about it at the end. Don't think I'm ignoring you. All right, types of vehicles and terminology. So starting out with an internal combustion engine, or an ICE, that is basically a petrol or diesel vehicle. The second one is a hybrid, and a lot of people think of a hybrid as an electric car, which it kind of is. And the most recognizable one, I guess, is the Prius. They've got an electric motor and then the battery, which just essentially sort of supplements the petrol motor and makes it more efficient. So you don't plug in a hybrid to charge, you just fill it up at a petrol station. When you look at the fuel consumption figures of a hybrid, they are definitely better, but not heaps better than just a really efficient petrol car. And they also work best around the city with the stop-start driving, and that's also where electric vehicles are best as well. So look, they really were a fantastic option sort of 15 years ago when there were no electric cars, but they're just not really what this talk is about today. The next thing you might hear about is a plug-in hybrid, or a PHEV, and that has a battery and a petrol engine, and the petrol engine will kick in once the battery runs out. So you do plug up PHEV in to charge the battery, and you also fill it up at a petrol station. In theory, as long as your trips are short enough and you're very diligent about charging in between those trips, you could run mostly in electric mode. But the range on those vehicles is usually quite short, around 60 kilometres, up to about 100 is about the best I've seen. I'm not going to talk a lot about them because the argument is that you're kind of getting the worst of both worlds. You're getting this really small battery range and you still have to maintain the combustion engine. And also, if you're able to keep all your trips within 60 kilometres, you're going to be completely fine in a full battery electric vehicle. But look, have a look at your driving habits carefully, and we'll talk about this a bit later. And if you think it fits your situation, then of course, that's another option. What I'm mostly talking about today is full battery electric vehicles, and they're the only ones that run entirely on electricity. They don't use fuel at all, and they've got zero tailpipe emissions. Hybrids, really popular at the moment, selling really well, and I can definitely see the appeal because making the step to a full battery electric vehicle just feels a bit scary to a lot of people. It just feels like a big leap to make. It's like when I talk to my kids and I say it's new feeling when you're trying something new. So people sort of go, look, I'm going to make that half step into a hybrid. And what I'm hoping you'll see today is that after you have a really good look at your driving habits, a full battery electric vehicle's probably going to suit the needs of most people, and you won't need to make that half step. And that way you get the full benefits of having a full battery electric vehicle. All right, which is best for the environment? Now, I think most people who are interested in electric vehicles for environmental reasons would agree that the best car for the environment is no car at all. Because a car, even an electric car, contributes to congestion, means you have to build car parks and roads. You know, there are embedded environmental impacts in the manufacture of all cars. If we had well-designed, high-density living around public transport nodes with good walking and biking infrastructure, that, in my opinion, would of course be much better than staying the way we are with everyone driving cars. But I do think we have to be pragmatic. The reality is very few people are willing to give up their car, and there's a really long lead time for developing that kind of urban design in Perth. Whereas all the cars pretty much turn over in 10 to 20 years, and that's much more the speed we need to be going at if we're going to drastically cut our carbon emissions in the way that we need to. But obviously not an either or situation. We need to advocate for both those things at the same time. The next best thing for the environment is a small car, and that's true for an ICE or an electric vehicle because, you know, your fuel or electricity consumption is less, they weigh less, there's less wear on the tyres and the roads, fewer materials are involved in making them and so on. So if you can make that switch from a big car to a smaller one, ideally electric, that's when you're going to get the best environmental outcome. But that's not what people mean, is it? When we're talking about this issue. So on the whole, though, between an ICE and an EV, which is best for the environment? And look, what a hot topic this is. And I think it's really great because people are actually talking about the embedded emissions and impacts that come with all of our consumer goods. And it means I get to talk about another one of my favourite topics, which is life cycle assessment. Now, life cycle assessment is when you look at all of the carbon emissions and other environmental impacts over the life cycle of a vehicle from cradle to grave. So in other words, from mining to manufacture to use phase and to landfill, because that's really important. We shouldn't be promoting options that seem better in one part of their life, but over the whole life cycle are actually much worse. And there are life cycle assessments done for all sorts of things, not just cars. So you can't just say electric cars create a lot of carbon emissions in their manufacture, so we shouldn't use them. You have to compare the entire life cycle impacts of that EV with the entire life cycle of an ICE car, and we have to put numbers to it, which is very important. So when it comes to carbon emissions, electric vehicles emit much less over their life cycle. And in your links document, you'll see a link to an article by the ABC, which explains the life cycle carbon emissions of an electric versus a petrol car in a really accessible way. That's a really great article to have a look at if you're interested in this. But the gist of it is that, yes, electric vehicles have higher emissions in their manufacture. They did well and truly make up for that over their lifetime. And that's usually within the first year or two or the first 20 to 40,000 kilometres. And that is true even if you charge entirely from the grid. So people have been focusing on those manufacturing emissions of the battery, but forgetting the emissions involved in extracting, refining, transporting and burning oil over and over and over again. But the difference in the emissions varies a bit depending on where you live and how clean the grid is there. And it depends a lot on what car you've got now and what car you're going to replace it with. And also if you have solar panels you can charge your car from. So really big shout out to the Electric Vehicle Council who've actually made a calculator that lets you work that out for your particular situation. And so I'm going to show you some of the results of that now. You can see on this slide here, they've got the lifetime CO2 emissions using electricity from Western Australia. And the green bit down the bottom is the carbon emissions from the vehicle manufacturer. So that was pretty similar for an ICE versus an EV. The orange is the battery production. So you can see that is a bit higher for an electric car. And then the blue is the fuel life cycle. So the blue on the left is for the electric car, is the electricity, and then on the other side is the fuel. And you can see that comparing a medium SUV, EV and a petrol, the emissions over the life cycle are about 42% less over its life. Then if you add in rooftop solar and you're charging from that, you can see the difference it makes. So it's about 72% less if you're charging from your rooftop solar. So yeah, I guess in reality, you're charging a bit from the grid, you're charging from your solar. If you've got solar panels, your carbon emission reductions are going to be somewhere between those two things. So yeah, have a play around with that calculator and you can look at your current and potential future car and see how much carbon emissions you'll be saving. So materials and recycling, and this is something else that comes up a lot with regards to EVs. Battery recycling will be very important, and in Australia it's in its infancy, but it is starting to happen. There was an announcement back in February of the battery remanufacturing facility that's going to be established in Collie. I've heard of another WA-based startup that's pioneering new battery recycling techniques. There's a lot of investment going into this. But at the end of the day, I guess, there is at least something left to recycle with like a lot of valuable minerals in it, which make it desirable for recycling. Oil, which is mined, you know, to drive an ICE car, is burnt and then lost to the atmosphere forever after that. Nickel and cobalt mining is something else that comes up a lot, and rightly so. It's definitely of concern when it's mined in places without good environmental and human rights laws. Ethical supply chains are a major issue, not just for electric cars, but for all consumer goods and oil as well. There's lots of, you know, dodgy things in that supply chain as well. So I think it is really important we do research and demand ethical supply chains for everything we buy. But that's not to dismiss it in EVs. And luckily, in the case of electric cars, there is one really big choice you can make to avoid that issue altogether. So basically, there are three main battery chemistries. And the first one is called NMC, or lithium nickel manganese cobalt, and it'll be written in the brochures and things like with NMC, or NCA, which is lithium nickel cobalt aluminium. And both of those do obviously contain nickel and cobalt. They're more used now in longer range and performance cars. There is another type of battery chemistry called lithium iron phosphate, which will be written as LFP or LiFePO4. And that's a battery chemistry which is increasingly common in cars now. Nearly half, I think, have this chemistry, and that doesn't contain nickel or cobalt. And it has lots of other benefits as well, like it's just a more robust chemistry, it's cheaper, it's less prone to fires and things like that. And then finally, there's new battery chemistries coming out all the time, but one of them is one called sodium ion that has no critical minerals at all, so not even lithium in it. So when you're buying a car, you know, have a good look at the battery chemistry and research your car manufacturer's supply chains and just choose one that sort of best fits those ethical considerations. There is another angle on those minerals as well, and that is a lot of them are mined in Australia, where our track record is better. And so we're a big producer of lithium, nickel and cobalt. And so this actually presents, you know, a pretty huge opportunity for Australia to produce ethical minerals for the energy transition where they're needed. And then finally, you could also look at a second-hand EV because you could argue that you didn't drive demand for that in the first place. So that's another option. Do they catch fire? Yes, look, they definitely can. It's just much, much less likely than a petrol or diesel vehicle catching fire. So 0.012% chance of a vehicle, battery catching fire versus 0.1% for an ICE vehicle. The batteries, if they do go into thermal runaway, which is just like a kind of chemical chain reaction that happens in the batteries, the fire is much more intense and they are harder to put out. And that's just kind of the reality of it. But like I said, really, really rare that they happen. Most of the fires you hear about in the news and stuff like that are, tool batteries or e-ridables, they're just much less regulated than EVs are. We are really lucky to have in Australia an organisation called EV Fire Safe, and they train emergency responders on EV fire behaviour, how to put out EV fires, and they collect meticulous data on EV fires and investigate some of these stories and videos and stuff that you see going viral to see what the actual story is. Because would you believe it, lots of the stuff that's floating around on the internet is actually just completely fake. So EV FireSafe, really fantastic balanced resource if you want to get the facts about EV fires. But look, there's just so many sophisticated safeguards built into your EV. I wouldn't worry about it too much. And just to make an unfortunate personal point, here is a picture of my poor husband's electric car after he hit a kangaroo at 110 k's an hour. And look, it didn't burst into flames. So they are designed to be involved in major crashes, just like any ICE. All right, but they're expensive. Unfortunately, that car is not my car. But look, there's lots of options for cheaper electric cars now. Second-hand vehicles are now an option because as of July, it has now been 3 years since the Fringe Benefits Tax exemption was brought in for electric vehicles. So the organisations that bought those cars as fleet vehicles are now starting to turn them over and more are coming onto the market. And I read a great report by Pickles from the auction house that is showing that that's definitely the case, that more second-hand EVs are coming onto the market. The cheapest new vehicle at the moment is 32,000 drive away, and that's a BYD Dolphin. As a comparison, a Yaris is almost exactly the same price. So the prices are coming down. And as at August 2025, there were 116 models available. So there is lots of choice out there and something that will suit you. So rebates and incentives. Unfortunately, you have missed out on the WA rebate, which was around until the 10th of May. Yes, if you're into novated leases or you run a business, there is still the Fringe Benefits Tax exemption that's available. And if you're in one of the switcher thinking local government areas, they have a rebate, like a program that offers discounts on lots of different sustainable products, including EV chargers. So you can have a look on there if you are interested in an EV charger. So would an EV work for you and how you use your car specifically? Now, to work that out, it's worth collecting some data on, firstly, the lengths of the individual trips you take to work out the range that you need, and secondly, the total kilometres you travel in a year to work out how much money you'll save. So starting with the individual trips, people get quite worried when they look at the range of a car and they go, 310 kilometres. It just doesn't sound like a lot. And they think, I'm going to need a car with like 600 kilometres range before I could ever buy one. You're only going to know that for sure if you look at it objectively by collecting data, because humans are really, really bad at guessing these things. So over at least, a typical week or a month, just track your trips and track the number of Ks you do each day in between sort of leaving and coming back home when you could plug your car in again, just to top it up for the next trip. And so the cheapest new EVs have a worst case sort of real world range of about 250 kilometres, and that's if you were driving on the highway in the worst conditions. So you just need to sort of mark down if your trip is less than that. In 2020, the average car travelled 12,100 kilometres, or just 33.2 kilometres per day. So you can see how easy that is for any EV that's out there on the market at the moment. And I think sometimes people have to actually objectively collect that data to work out that most EVs, even the low range ones, are going to meet their needs. The second thing you need is how many kilometres you travel in a year. And that bit is easy. So, you just over a month, just set your odometer, track in total how many kilometres you travel, multiply that by 12. And the reason you need your annual kilometres is that the level of carbon and cost savings you're going to make depends a lot on how much you use your car. The business case improves greatly the higher the usage of your vehicle. Then you can plug that figure into a total cost of ownership calculator, and I'm going to show you one of them in a minute. Last year, or in the year when I first bought my second EV and we had one ICE and one EV, I ended up driving nearly 30,000 kilometres in my EV. And that really shocked me because I thought we were just average car users. And I guess that shows the value, firstly, of collecting that data. You can't just sort of guess, even if you think you do know how much you use it. And what I'm thinking happened is that because we had two cars, a petrol and an EV, normally people would just have their own cars and they would split the use evenly. And that's not something we did. We really favoured the electric car because it was obviously saving us money and it was more fun to drive. So that might be something that you might like to do as well. That might be an alternative to getting a hybrid if you've got a two-car family. And if that's the case, you could get the total kilometres of both cars you're using at the moment, and then maybe assign sort of 3/4 to the electric car, and then the rest to the ICE. All right, range. So now you have your trip distances. It's important to get a vehicle with a range that fits how you use your car. And the standardized measure of the range is WLTP, or Worldwide Harmonized Light Vehicles Test Procedure. And that is a pretty good estimate for urban driving, but you want to take off about sort of 30% if you're doing entirely rural or highway driving. If you're buying a new car, you can just compare your trip distances to the WLTP range and then just kind of go from that. It's a little bit more tricky for a second-hand car because battery chemistries in the very early models did degrade. So on car sales, they have a quoted range, but that'll be when the car was new. And to make it worse, it's often the NEDC range, which is sort of wildly optimistic. If you ever see the NEDC range quoted, just ignore that and try and find the WLTP range. So a quick way to see how much range they have is to get the owner just to charge the car to 100% and then see what the range estimator says. So you can see here up here, I've got my old Leaf up the top there. That's fully charged, has a grand total of 67 kilometres range. And believe it or not, that was actually still a really useful car to us because so many of our trips were short. Underneath that is my husband's car. I didn't get it quite charged to the top, but you can see it's got 286 kilometres range there. I guess when you're doing that, remember that like an ICE car, the range estimator, estimates that based on recent driving patterns. So if you're driving up and down hills a lot, it's going to be a bit less. If you've been driving around the city, it's going to be a bit more. But it's a good rough estimate. To get a more accurate report, the RAC now do electric vehicle pre-purchase inspections, and as part of that do a diagnostic test on the battery. So when they do that, you'll get this figure, the SOH%, that's the state of health of the battery, and just kind of tells you how much battery is left. I've also seen that Pickles, as part of that report I showed you, they're rolling out battery health reports on their used EVs. I don't think that it's happening in Perth yet, but they said that it would get rolled out across the country. Now, just a note about battery degradation. There at the bottom is a really great article which presented some research conducted by a fleet management company, and it analysed the battery degradation of 6,300 electric vehicles. So really good sample size. And they found that modern cars are losing about 2.3% battery capacity per year, and at that rate it would take about 15 years to get to 70% capacity. And because modern cars have long ranges to start off with, it's just not the issue that it was sort of 10 years ago. The main car that was around then was the Nissan Leaf, and they did not have a liquid cooling system for their battery, and that impacts its life a lot, especially in hot places like Perth. So my 2012 Leaf, as you've seen, that started out with a range of about 100 Ks, and it got down to about 67 by the time we sold it. New cars have infinitely better chemistries and very sophisticated battery management systems, and they just don't get degradation like the old Leafs do. So sometimes you used to hear about Leafs having their batteries replaced, but battery replacement is just not really a thing for the new cars at all. The batteries are outlasting the life of the vehicle. Now Pickles is providing that battery health testing. They're also collecting data on battery health, and you can see these are the ones I've collected in Australia. That was only 650 vehicles, but as you can see, it's quite similar to what that other report found. So the second car we bought for my husband was a 5-year-old second-hand EV, and when it's charged to 100%, I actually can't see much difference in its range from when it was new. So to work out if an EV is going to save you money, you need to compare the EV with what you would have done anyway. So if you're in the market for a new car now and you're choosing between, to give a really extreme example, a diesel dual cab ute, and you've worked out you could actually make a mid-size EV work in your situation, the purchase price is probably going to be more for the ute, and your fuel and maintenance savings are going to be huge. If you're buying a new car and choosing between like for like, it really depends a lot on the cars you're choosing between. The savings can sort of offset the higher purchase cost, but it just really depends on how many kilometres you do in a year. So to see what the savings would be for you specifically, that's when you use a calculator. And there's a few options out there, and I've got links to them there. But my favorite is any that calculates the total cost of ownership, because that's what fleet managers will use when they work out which car is going to be the cheapest over the time that they're going to own it. And that's because it looks at everything over the car's life. So fuel, maintenance, rego, insurance, everything. And they're going to work out which one is the cheapest over, 3 or 5 or 10 years or however long they decide to keep the vehicle. And that life cycle costing is the information you really need to make an informed decision about the savings you're going to make, rather than just going, oh, gosh, it looks a little bit more upfront. I don't think I'd ever make that back with my fuel savings. You have to put the numbers to it. Now, the easiest one I found to use is the one at the top from Transport New South Wales. I like it best because it just lets you pick the vehicles and it populates all the other information for you. But it is unfortunately a little bit buggy, so you do have to be a little bit sort of patient with it when you're using it. So I've got some screenshots of some comparisons I did between different vehicles here. So this is what I kind of guessed was a like for like, EV on the left and then an ICE on the right. And you can see over the 5-year cost to own is a little bit more for the electric vehicle. And of course, this is over 5 years. If you keep the car longer, the savings are going to keep going from then on out. This is with average kilometres of 12,100 kilometres per year. If you had home solar, the electric vehicle then does become slightly cheaper to own over those 5 years. This is with 30,000 kilometres and home solar, and you can see that it's actually much cheaper to own the EV over 5 years. It's about $10,000 less. And then if you want to make the comparison between a large car and a small one, the difference in this case with a smaller electric car is about $25,000 less. So that's a really good holiday after 5 years. Now, I guess the thing to be aware of with this is that the business case changes a lot depending on the exact cars that you're looking at. And the other thing to think about is the on-road costs in this tool. They're sometimes not up to date, so the savings are kind of indicative. If you want to get a bit more precise and you like to use an Excel spreadsheet like me, you can always use this calculator, which is from a really great website called Solar Quotes. They mostly give a lot of information on solar, but also EVs and other sort of electrification technologies as well. And people look at this and they get a little bit scared because it's just lots of numbers, but you don't need to be scared of this. Down the left-hand side, you can see all the EV upfront costs. So that's where you just type in all the purchase price, rego insurance, all those sorts of things. Just go down and fill that out. Then the same thing for the ICE next to it. and then it'll calculate the total cost of ownership over here. And you can see I've circled sort of in red there the difference in total cost of ownership. And this is the big car versus the small electric car example, and it comes up with roughly the same sorts of savings, about $25,000. So really great one to have a play around with to find out a bit more precisely what your savings would be. All right, but what about the ongoing ownership costs? How do you find out what they might be? Now, maintenance should be much less because there's just a whole lot less moving parts in an ICE vehicle. The main things they seem to check are things like your tires and your brakes and stuff like that. They might do a software update. But yeah, in most cases it's much less. But of course, dealers being dealers, they still like to charge you money. So the way to find that out exactly is to go out way and have a look at their servicing schedule for each vehicle you're looking at, and then what the cost for that would be. When it comes to tyres, they do need a special tyre because they are a bit heavier than an ICE vehicle. And this is an estimate for the range of the cost of the tyres from a tyre retailer website that I found. So you can see on average, the tyres are a little bit more expensive, but if you do shop around, you should be able to find something that's equivalent to an ICE. And insurance is something else that people ask me about all the time. I went to a really great webinar by the Australian Electric Vehicle Association where there were two actual insurers there. And the takeaway from that was that insurance is just calculated according to so many factors that it's a bit hard if it's going to work out if it's going to be more for you or not. But it looked like on the whole, it was slightly more expensive to insure EVs, but getting better all the time as they just become more common. And so their hot tip was to look for a vehicle with a really good repairer network and shop around, and then it shouldn't be too much more expensive. So what about holidays? So you can still go on holidays in an electric car. There's lots of options. If you go away a lot, maybe a long range electric vehicle might be best for you. Some of them can go up to like 600 kilometres now. The WA electric vehicle network has now been completed, and the idea behind that was that charges would be every 150 k's or so. So they would be within the reach of most electric cars. And that's just the WA EV network charges. There are lots more charges that are out there as well. If, like I've said before, if you're a two-car family, a great half step into EVs is just to keep one ICE. You can replace most of your trips with the EV. And then if there's a longer trip that you're just not confident about, just use your ICE for that one. A PHEV. So this will be a bit unpopular amongst the EV purists, but again, I'm all about your particular situation. If you're a one-car family, you've done all that trip data collection, most of your trips are, very short, within the range of a PHEV, but you do one monthly 900-kilometre trip into the desert, then a plug-in hybrid might be something that works for you. For the odd trip, you could borrow or hire a larger car. Something people forget is that you might be able to charge at your accommodation, even just at a normal old plug, but it's just important to ask beforehand and offer to pay if you're doing that. And some accommodation places have dedicated charges as well. Like I drove down to Dunsborough and stayed at one of those resort things that are there. They had a charger I could use. Will it take longer? Possibly, just very much depends on your car and the trip. As more chargers come online and get faster, that's going to be less of an issue. There is an app which you can use to work it out, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. Public charges. So if the availability or the expense of charges is what's putting you off, just remember that people do the vast majority of their charging at home. I would very rarely use a public charger, like maybe once every few months or so. The public charger situation is sort of still developing. It's going through the process of becoming more reliable and easy to use. At the moment, there's sort of different networks that need different apps, but it is becoming easier as more chargers open and they move towards sort of tap and pay systems. And again, it's new feeling. Once you've worked it out, it's actually pretty easy. So this is my process if I need to use a public charger. My first step is to look on a website called PlugShare, which has all of the different chargers across all of the networks. Then I'll look at the relevant network app, and then for longer trips, I'll use an app called a Better Route Planner. So this is PlugShare. PlugShare's been around for a long time. It used to be where people just put up their own PowerPoints and let any EV chargers plug into them. EV people driving their EVs just plug into it. It's a nice community thing. Now it's just the public chargers, although some of them you have to check they might be restricted to customers or employees. And so it looks like this. The green dots are slow chargers and the orange ones are the fast chargers. And when you click on the dot, it comes up with all the details you can see down the left-hand side there. It'll tell you what network it's with, tell you how much it costs, tell you if you need a cord or not. Some of the slow chargers, you might need your own cord. The fast chargers generally all have their own cord. And you can check the plug as well. Some of the old Nissan Leafs had a plug called a CHAdeMO, but that's really being phased out now. Most new cars will have something called a CCS2 plug for fast charging or a Type 2 plug for slow charging. So once I've done that, I'll go into the charging network app. And so this is the app for the ChargeBox for the WA EV network. And it's really cool. You can see that there are two ports available here, port A and port B. They're CCS2, and it gives you real-time information on whether those plugs are available or not and how charged the car is there, which I just think is amazing. So that's a really handy thing to check before you go to make sure, that you're going to be able to get a spot. If you need to do a long trip, you can use something called a better route planner. And this is also really cool. In this, you put in your model vehicle so it knows your range and it will calculate based on the elevation. You will work out the state of charge when you leave and when you get there. And in the, I think it's the premium version, it'll even factor in the weather. And you can see, so this is a trip I planned from Perth to Albany. We'd have to stop for, and this is with my car, which has got one of the shortest ranges that are available at the moment. I'd have to stop at Williams for 11 minutes and then Cogen up in 18 minutes. So for me, that's fine. I'd probably stop in those places anyway. If you're the kind of person who likes to drive on through, then you might like a longer range vehicle. But that's a really cool tool. And if you do a regular trip into the country and you're worried about whether electric car's going to make it, you might like to have a play around with this before you buy your new car, just so you can have that confidence that it will. All right, so charger etiquette. If you're in a spot where people might be waiting to charge, it's polite to stop charging after 80% if you can, just because charging slows down after 80% because of physics. And that just kind of means that when you're planning a trip, you plan to sort of stop more often and just do shorter, smaller charges. And that's faster for you as well as for other people. If never park in a charger spot when you're not charging, definitely never park your ICE in a charger spot because it's kind of like just parking your car in the forecourt of a service station and then just leaving. People get annoyed. So if you plug your car in and then leave it after it's charged, most of the chargers will now charge you very steep idling fees, like even $1 a minute. So that's the good thing about the app. You can take it with you and you can kind of see how long it's going to take to finish charging and you can get back before it stops. I should say as well, though, you don't always have to use the app if that's not your thing. They have, most of the charging networks can send you a little RFID card that you can tap to start charging and turn it off as well. All right, home charging. So all cars should come with a portable charger that just have a regular old plug in them so you can plug them into a PowerPoint. Lots of people use that charger just to charge from home. With my first car, with the Leaf, I just used the portable charger and it was completely fine. I'm finding now with my newer sort of longer range car, I'm just driving a lot more and the portable charger would have cut it. So, but I definitely use it quite a lot. I'll use it when I go to my family's farm and to charge overnight and stuff like that. So we had a dedicated 7 kilowatt charger installed by a usual solar electrician. You don't have to use the one that's being sold by your car manufacturer. Whatever you do, you just might want to check that it's compatible with all vehicles. Most of them will just have like a Type 2 type plug. Something else you might want to look at is whether it's OCPP compatible, which means it's open source communication protocol and it's not tied. That means it's not tied to a particular brand. It's more likely your charger will be compatible with things like demand management initiatives. So Western Power might remotely dial down your charging if the grid's under stress, or increase the charging when there's too much solar and then reimburse you for that privilege. Or it can help with later if you need to integrate your charger with your battery and solar and stuff like that. It's just, it doesn't set up any of those things. It just is a protocol that allows it more like that to happen more easily. Some chargers allow you to just charge from your excess solar only. So that's something you need to ask your installer about whether the charger you're choosing can do that. That link is to a really great table that shows reputable and well-supported chargers in charger brands in Australia. That's by Solar Quotes as well, that website I told you about before. Yeah, so that's a good thing to have a look at if you're in the market for a charger. If you live in an apartment or a shared car park or don't have off-street parking, it is just genuinely at the moment a little bit tricky to have a charger installed. You can, of course, use public chargers to charge all the time. It's just going to affect your savings because it's generally more expensive than charging at home. Although on like a Facebook page I was on the other day, a guy said he lived in an apartment, couldn't get a charger, but his gym had free chargers. So I thought, how cool is that? That would be a huge incentive to exercise if I could, go to the gym and get free fuel every time I went. So again, it's all about your situation. Have a look on PlugShare and you might find something like that locally, although the free chargers are getting harder and harder to find. And finally, my tip is remember your ABCs, which is always be charging. So every time you get home, get in the habit of plugging in your car. And that way it's just sort of constantly getting topped up. It's ready for your next trip, so you're not going to get stranded. It's quite a different way of thinking about refueling your car. Like probably the number one question I get asked is how long does it take to fill from empty to full? And yes, that probably takes about 9 hours, and they're comparing that to 10 minutes at a fuel station. But it's just not how it works. Like I'm topping it up all the time and there's just always enough for my next trip. And when it is charging, I'm at home anyway, so I don't really notice that it's charging. And I probably actually save more, more time than taking the 10 minutes to go to the petrol station every week. So don't, use it like an ECE car, fill it right up and then drive it around till it's empty, because guaranteed that'll be the day you need to go to, I don't know, Geraldton for something. Always be charging and then you won't get stuck. All right, other fun features. Vehicle to load is one of my favorite things about my car. It'll be written as V2L, and it's where you can plug in this adapter and then plug in an appliance to the adapter. So that's really handy in a blackout. You can plug in your fridge or a router. Also really great for camping or using power tools in a remote location. Also really great for when your shearer turns up and he needs a power point, but your sheep are a really long way from the nearest power point. So that actually happened to me. Probably not a very common scenario, it's to be sure, but I feel like this is the first sheep that's been shorn by an electric car. And people say, won't that flatten your battery? EV batteries with this feature have at least 50 kilowatt hours, which is about 2.5 days worth of an average household's energy use. So my shearer could have driven there, shorn sheep all day and driven home again as well. I've seen people use this for food stalls at markets because they don't have like stinky loud generators, inflating bouncy castles at a kid's birthday party at the park. There's just so many uses for this. I love it. But look, not all cars have it, so make sure that yours does if that's something that you want. V2G, vehicle to grid, and V2H, vehicle to home, are other things that are often talked about. They're just not really here yet. The Australian standards for the V2G has been approved recently and they should be coming out soon, but there's just not something that's really taken off just yet. Regenerative braking. So I love regenerative braking. It takes the energy that would have gone into your brakes in an ICE car, puts it back in the battery, and it just makes your brake pads last longer and also increases efficiency as well. So it takes a little bit of getting used to. I actually really prefer it. I feel much safer with the regenerative braking, but if you don't like it, I know that my car allows me to adjust it. You just have less efficiency, that's all. My husband, when I asked him what he liked about the car, he said the torque or the zippiness, they are super zippy, but don't get carried away because you will wear your tyres more. There was one lady that came to one of my workshops who said she'd had 3 speeding tickets in 3 months after she bought her electric car. So don't be like her. Make sure you're driving safely. And I really also love no last minute run to the petrol station when I'm late in the morning. And I also feel like it's really great for kids' sports training because I could never justify leaving the car running before to have the heater going. Now I can turn the car on, have my heater going, and sit there toasting warm while my poor son's running around at hockey training. Okay, so I am a bit worried about you after today. You're going to go, okay, that all makes sense. And then your neighbor will say something, or, you'll get confused again, and you won't know who to ask. So I have to give a big plug to the Australian Electric Vehicle Association. They are fabulous organisation. They represent all EV consumers, users, and enthusiasts. There's lots of things you can get with membership to them. You can get access to those webinars that I was talking about, including the insurance one, and at cost RFID cards. So remember those tap and pay cards I said you could get? They offer you one that can be set up with all of the networks, so you only have one card, and they have a member hotline. So if you have any questions after today, then you can go away and give them a call. One of their volunteers will answer it as well. So that's yeah, really great organisation to join up to. All right, so in summary, have a good look at your specific situation and usage habits, and you might find you could make an electric vehicle work for you. And look, I definitely don't regret it. I love it. It's so great to drive, so quiet. I really notice the fumes with ICE vehicles now. And of course, the best thing is driving smugly past the petrol station like this fellow here. So right, sorry, I'll read out the question. I'm curious about charging daily, nightly at home, and similar to our smartphone batteries of charging daily without the battery being near empty before charging, does charging daily, nightly an EV battery affect its battery health? So a few things there. A lithium iron phosphate battery is much more robust and doesn't mind being topped up all the time. Even with the NMC and NCA batteries, they sort of recommend charging to 80% or so. So you can set a limit. Often those cars will have something that'll let it cut out at 80%, and then you can charge to 100% if you need to do a long trip. So you can set that up if that's what you're worried about. But new batteries, the battery management systems are just so sophisticated that, yeah, it's not really an issue for battery health. I just kind of charge the car how I need to use it. I don't worry too much about that. So that hopefully that answers that question. Okay, someone else has asked about doesn't it damage the battery to be constantly topped up? Oh, and someone else asked about charging only to 80%. Yeah, so if you've got a car with an NMC battery, make sure you find out that setting to limit it charging to 80% for just your everyday driving. Otherwise, have a look into the lithium iron phosphate batteries because it's just not such an issue. On the battery degradation side, you mentioned 15 years to outlast the life of the battery. Did I get that correct? I can go back to that one. It was 15 years to get to 70%, I think. So you still have 70% left of your battery capacity then, but also remembering that that's data is based on cars that would now be sort of 10 years old. And the new cars that are coming out now are going to be even better. So that was kind of the outcome of that particular study. But have a read of that document. The link's in the links document as well if you want to read more about the battery degradation. And then I guess, we have a question, will battery degrade over time and cost more to replace in future than it saves? Yeah, well, that's kind of what that study found, was that the batteries were outlasting the life of the car, so you won't have to replace it. It also, and if you're only keeping your car sort of for 5 to 10 years, then yeah, it should be fine. A lot of the cars have warranties for that long now.
Just had one final question come through. Do we think the cost of registration is likely to increase?
Cost of registration? I've not heard anything about that. No. they're talking about a road user charge. The states were going to bring that in, but then that was found to be unconstitutional, so that's not going to happen. I think eventually we'll probably have to pay for the roads in some way, and I've just completely forgotten the name of the charge. I think it's just called a road user charge. The federal government's looking at that at the moment, but there's no immediate plans, as far as I know, to bring that in. Hopefully, that'll be down the track in a few years once the EVs are much cheaper.
And there
Oh,
is one more question that's just come through. I'll just mute and leave you to answer that.
are there any cheap EV hire options for people to get hands-on learning experiences of the difference between ICE versus EV and the learning curve? There is, but the name has escaped me. I think there's one that allows you, like everyday people can just put their EVs to be hired out, and I can't remember it. But how about I look into that and send it to Kerry and she can send it on, if that's okay, Kerry. And lots of the commercial,
Yeah, no, I can definitely do that. And I have heard that the car rental company called Sixt do a lot of EV hire.
mhm.
So I'll just pop that in the chat as well so I can spell that. But we're not endorsing Sixt. It's just that I have heard they have quite a few EVs for hire.
Yeah, and someone's pointed out that lots of car rental companies have EVs. I think it is probably true if you looked at most most rental places, you could get an EV option.
Yeah.
Mm. Fabulous. Any other questions? I think we've got 1 minute to go. Nope, nothing else. Wonderful. Well, yeah. Oh, what? Oh, we have one last one. Okay, we've got 1 minute. What do you think of all the cheap cars coming from overseas? Um, I I don't like to say, I can't really say that any particular ones are better or worse than others, but I haven't. Like there are a lot of really fantastic cars coming out of China, and I haven't really heard bad things. They're really at the very forefront of developing EVs, so there's lots of cool technology coming out there. So I wouldn't discount them.
And what I would say is if you use Facebook and some of those other social media platforms, there are some really great EV owner pages, and people often share their experiences with driving a certain electric vehicle. Sometimes they can be talking about whether or not the software is a little bit dodgy or they're having issues in other ways. So that's another way that you can get a sense of the user experience.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.